Good afternoon and welcome to the second session of our program, How to Protect Your Garden. Today's topic is going to be on herbs. My name is Bob Bruner and I am the A&R Extension Educator with Purdue University based in Clay and Owen counties. Today I would like to start our discussion of herbs with one of the most popular ones that we have in our kitchens, basil. Basil is a great choice for herbs to grow because it's capable of surviving for several years with proper care and consideration to keep the plant healthy. Basil is, much like all the other herbs we're going to discuss today, a warm season sun-loving herb. It is originally an import from India. However, it has spread worldwide and it's hard to find a kitchen or home that doesn't have some form of basil within it. Basil is a relative to mint species, and while mints are typically very hardy and very capable of surviving, basil requires a certain level of care to make sure that it is able to thrive as we move it indoors and outdoors as the season and the year wears on. Now, as a full sun plant, basil can still survive in partial shade as long as it gets at least 6 hours of sunlight. It does have some sensitivity to the soil pH and usually does best when the soil pH is around 6 to 6.5. This means that if you are trying to make sure your pH maintains at that level, considerations for lime need to happen during the fall season to make sure you time it appropriately. While basil doesn't require much in terms of fertilization, if you do feel like it needs it, the recommended organics for this are compost, pine bark, and manure to add nitrogen and other necessary nutrients to the soil. If you are cultivating throughout the year, it's recommended that you seed basil indoors and then move it outside once the daytime temperatures are above 70 degrees and the nighttime temperatures are above 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Like I said, basil doesn't need much fertilizer, so you're going to want to avoid over-fertilizing this plant. If you don't, you're going to experience a reduction in the flavor of the leaves when you harvest them. The best strategy to use to make sure your soil is properly prepared is to soil test, at least every 2 years, preferably every year. That way you can guarantee a nutrient bank after each growing season, so that way the plants have enough there to thrive on and you won't waste money applying something that you may not need to. The recommended fertilizer for basil is normally about 1/4 to 1/2 pound of calcium nitrate over 100 square feet. So you're going to want to do some calculations to be able to figure out what you need. One thing about basil is that it does need a constant supply of water. However, like we're about to discuss with a lot of the diseases that can occur in basil, you want to make sure you do not overwater this plant. Overwatering will result in an increased level of pathogens, and that is not something you want. Now, a lot of us will grow our basil indoors as the winter goes on. Technically, basil will die off, at least most varieties will die off, once they seed. However, you can keep the plants alive and keep them flourishing by first removing terminal growth points. These growth points, when removed, will encourage thickening and branching of the plant, making it tougher, bigger, and bushier. Removing the flower buds as soon as they appear is very important. Like I said, if the plant seeds, the life of the plant will terminate, just like it would normally. However, if you remove those flower buds, you can prevent the seeding from happening and fool the plant into thinking that it is not yet reproduced. If you do save seed and want to replant that seed, make sure that you plant it 150 feet away from any other basil cultivars. This will prevent crossing between those plants and the accidental production of a basil plant that doesn't have the flavor profile that you're looking for. Now let's get into some diseases of basil. Unfortunately, there are several. Many of the diseases we discussed today are going to also be shared by tomatoes. You'll probably note a few immediately. Some example of diseases that basil will experience are fusarium wilt, gray mold, bacterial wilt, leaf spots, downy mildew, and root rot. Fusarium wilt is one of those diseases that's commonly shared by tomato. And in the picture in the background, you can see some of the symptoms of a fusarium wilt with browning of leaves and limbs. Now, Fusarium wilt is a fungal pathogen that is able to survive in the soil for quite a long time. What you will see is the plants will grow normally to about 6 inches in height, and then they'll stop growing, stunting and browning at the terminal growth points. And then the plant will just suddenly wilt and die. This is because the Fusarium pathogen, a spore in a fungus, will block up the vascular systems in the plant, preventing water and nutrients from moving through the plant. Gray mold is another disease that's common amongst basil plants. What you're seeing in the background here is actually a picture of tomatoes, as there were none for basil that I was able to find. However, it does demonstrate the effect of gray mold quite well. What you're seeing here are these furry bits covering the leaves are actually the fruiting bodies of the mold, which means that it is also a fungal illness that is producing spores. Now, gray mold is caused by Botrytis cinereale. It occurs when the leaves and stems are harvested during rainy days, or if you water overhead when the plant has been injured or cut. You usually want to wait about 24 hours after doing any harvesting, or if you notice an injury on the plant. The plant will have the ability to seal off the injured areas, and then the fungus or any other diseases won't be able to enter through those points. Once 24 hours have passed, the plants will be resistant and safe. However, if watering or rain occurs during that time, your plant is at risk for gray mold. Bacterial wilt is another disease that's shared with tomatoes. In the background, I'm actually showing a tomato plant in a cage that's been affected by bacterial wilt. This disease is particularly unpleasant. It's characterized by a rapid wilting of basil and other species like tomatoes, as I mentioned. The water-conducting vessels within the plant will become filled with what is sometimes referred to as bacterial streamers, a kind of bacterial slime. An easy way to check to see if a plant is suffering from a bacterial illness is to simply cut one of the leaves or one of the very small branches off and then touch the two cut ends together. If you see a sticky substance stretch between those two cut ends as you move them back and forth, you'll know that a bacterial illness has invaded that plant. While there are several tomato varieties that are resistant to bacterial wilt, there are none known within basil. So in the case of basil, you're going to want to closely monitor and avoid planting after tomatoes have been planted in that same area. Leaf spot diseases of basil are typically caused by fungi, though there are a few viruses that can cause leaf spot. In this case, though, we are more concerned with the fungal diseases. Now, what I want you to do is look closely at this image. You can see that there are spots covering those leaves, and it's easy just to write off as leaf spot, right? However, take a close look at those spots. Notice the almost concentric rings within the spots and the pale areas in the center. These are things that you can use to diagnose what is wrong with the basil plant. Also, look at the veins within the leaf. You can see the veins have browning. This is the fungal illness traveling through the veins of this plant and reaching out to other areas. There are several fungal species that will spread leaf spot. However, the one that you probably know the most is Alternaria, commonly known in tomatoes as early blight. While this disease is more common in southern states like South Carolina, we can have its presence noticed here in Indiana, especially when tomatoes have been planted close or in the same area before. You want to, in order to avoid this disease, stop sprinkling water from overhead. This is a good practice to get into, as a lot of fungal diseases are going to spread more easily when water is covering the outer above ground portion of the plant. You're going to want to get in the practice of watering at the base. Downy mildew is another one of our spot-like diseases. Now, there are two ways to know that this is downy mildew. One of them is by the yellowing that you see here on the leaf, if you look between the major veins. The other one is by the blackened areas that seem to contain a kind of white, fluffy appearance. This is a clear sign of downy mildew presence. This particular pathogen is spread by wind, and it's spread by infected seed stock. So that means that if you have plants that have been infected by this, don't save the seed. You would just be reintroducing it to the soil and making the problem even worse. If Eventually, as the leaves yellow and these black and brown spots develop, you'll experience leaf loss and eventually potentially the death of the plant itself. Unfortunately, I couldn't find good images of root rots to show you, so I'm just simply going to tell you about them, and hopefully you enjoyed the picture that I used in the last slide. Root rots are noticed normally by the yellowing and unthriftiness of the above ground portion of the plant. The plant will experience dieback starting at the tips. However, the biggest symptoms will occur directly on the roots in the form of lesions, which eventually, once the root system has rotted away, the plant will die. Now, to just sum up our basil before we jump into thyme, key things that I want you to take away: monitor how much and where you are watering these plants. Avoid using soil where you have had known disease issues before. And in general, I would avoid planting basil after tomato. That way you aren't sharing diseases between those two crops. Now let's dig into thyme. This plant is great. It's somewhat more hardy than our basil plants. And of course, all of us have thyme in our kitchens. Thyme is, like basil, sun-loving, and it's drought-resistant, which when the summers get really warm in Indiana, this can come in handy. Thyme is also great because it's an excellent source of nectar for foraging honeybees and other native bees, and it can produce really high-quality honey. Thyme is also used as a source of essential oils in a lot of products that we buy. Now, thyme can be propagated from seed or transplants. If you choose to seed thyme, you should only thinly cover them with dirt, so that way you can avoid drying out under the soil and there's still contact with water. Transplants, if you choose to do this, can be planted after hardening when they're 2 to 3 inches in height, normally about 8 weeks after they've germinated. Now, it's common to mulch thyme with limestone gravel. This allows the light to be reflected. That way the soil doesn't dry out and the sunlight goes to the leaves instead. And it conserves moisture and maintains drainage. You probably won't need to apply much in the way of fertilizer to thyme. It is fairly hardy. However, an occasional application may help. And it's also prudent to prune the tips of the shoots in order to promote branching in this plant. Now, with thyme, there is only one disease of concern that I'm going to discuss. Much like in basil, alternaria can infect thyme. Remember, this is the same disease that affects tomatoes. We usually call it early blight. So you're also going to want to avoid planting after or around tomatoes. If you do, go ahead and remove the you will see lower shaded leaves will develop brown spots with concentric rings. And if you recall some of the previous slides, I pointed that out to you. Leaves will drop and eventually alternaria will kill the plant. So this brings us to a good point. One of the ways that you can prevent a lot of pathogens from invading your plants is to clean up, maintain good sanitation. If you see leaves and branches that have died due to illness, get them off the ground. Don't let them stay there because many of these diseases are soil-borne, and this is how they get back into the soil. The third plant we're going to be discussing is rosemary. Rosemary is another popular one in our kitchens, and it is the only evergreen in our list today. Now, rosemary is, again, a sun-loving plant used in foods and a lot of scents. It is a cold-resistant plant above 27 degrees Fahrenheit, but harsher winters can kill it. So you'll note here in Indiana, while we can have the occasional warm winter, some of our winters can get fairly cold, which means rosemary will often be brought inside. It is, however, very drought-resistant, which makes it a great plant. It can be propagated from seeds and cuttings, but vegetative propagation is preferred due to the slow germination of this plant. When you do the vegetative propagation, make sure to remove the lower leaves from the cuttings before you pot them. That way the plant doesn't do anything unusual and those leaves wouldn't be useful anyways as they're so low to the ground. Transplants will be ready after 8 weeks, much like in our thyme. Now, rosemary is very prone to root rot. Remember, this is a drought-resistant plant, so it doesn't need to be watered that well, and it needs to be well drained. Water it only sparingly, allowing the soil to dry completely between waterings. Mulching this plant, if it's kept outside, will help protect the plants during winter by keeping that soil temperature a little bit higher, making them a little more resistant to the cold. Now, rosemary does have a few diseases. One of the ones that I'm going to talk about is one of the root rots, which I'm showing you an image of here. You'll notice the roots have different colors, often browning and looking kind of dead, which is a clear sign of a root rot in this plant that was removed from a pot. In this case, this is Phytophthora root rot. Phytophthora is an aggressive host-specific fungal disease. However, we often find it amongst ornamental trees as well. It does require that you source all of your plants from good sources. Make sure that you know they're providing you plants that don't have a history of root rot or other diseases. You'll also want to maintain strict sanitation in your soil and in the tools. Remember, our tools are easy ways to spread disease. And if we sanitize those, a little bit of bleach and water, you'll save yourself a lot of headache in the future. Root rot is usually very easily transported through water, so again, mind how much you're watering this plant. Crown gall is a bit of an unusual illness to talk about when you talk about herbs. However, it does occur within rosemary. What happens is some of the woodier parts of the plant will suddenly develop a cancerous growth, which can easily break open, causing injury to the plant and allowing more diseases to enter. Crown gall does not necessarily mean that the plant is useless. Many plants can survive an infection with crown gall. However, it can reduce the lifespan of the plant, and it might reduce the overall quality. Now, in this case, this crown gall is caused by an agrobacterium species. It'll enter through wounds in the root system. So if you do a repotting or a replanting of a rosemary plant, take extra care not to overly damage that root system and cause an accidental entry by agrobacteria. And like I said, it can create woody tumors that may kill younger plants. Now we're done with our diseases, so let's talk about a few of the insects that you're going to want to watch out for. I'm going to go over 4 species. 2 of them are primarily occurring outdoors, while 2 of them occur indoors. I want to cover indoor species because a lot of us will continue to develop our herbs throughout the winter inside our homes. And as we well know, a lot of insects can survive in our homes, even in the colder months. So first, let's talk about one of the worst ones, Japanese beetle. I have had a lot of conversations about Japanese beetles with gardeners, and unfortunately there aren't many great answers on how to handle the Japanese beetle. First of all, this is an invasive species. It does not belong in our area, which means it doesn't have any known predators, and plants have not yet evolved effective ways of defending themselves against it. Japanese beetle is a generalist and prolific plant feeder capable of skeletonizing plant leaves. You'll notice in the previous slide, though, you could see a lot of the major veins are still fully intact, which means the Japanese beetle is preferentially going for the soft tissue in these leaves. So tougher leaves may not get attacked by Japanese beetle, such as in our evergreen rosemary. It can attack many garden plants and trees, so if you see a plant near your garden, such as a tree, get attacked by Japanese beetle, you need to start thinking about control options to get rid of it before it attacks your garden. There are several insecticides that can work on Japanese beetle, such as carbaryl, imidacloprid, and pyrethroids. And these can be easily found in most garden and home supply stores. Just check the labels of any insecticides you're considering using and make sure you follow those label directions. Remember, the label is the law. Stink bugs and other species, I'm wrapping many insects up into this one group here because this represents not only stink bugs, but also leaf hoppers, aphids, and a whole slew of other ones. They all behave in similar ways. These are all sap-feeding insects. Instead of having mouth parts that are capable of chewing on a plant, their mouth parts are like a syringe. Entomologists refer to this as a rostrum. They poke this rostrum into the leaf tissue and drain it out like a vampire. Unfortunately, this means that they can transmit disease very easily between plants, most often plant viruses. Now, there are also several insecticides that will work, such as pyrethrums, insecticidal soap, and neem. I would typically recommend start with insecticidal soap or a neem product. See if that will help you. Many of these insects will have to take time to be able to feed, which means when they settle on a leaf, they need to settle there for at least 10 to 15 minutes, giving you an opportunity to clean them off using an insecticidal soap and saving you some hassle. I also recommend using a bucket of soapy water to just dump the insects in once you get them off of your plant. Now for our indoor species, let's start with whiteflies. Whiteflies are one of the biggest problems within greenhouses. And if you do a lot of plant growing within your home, you may develop issues with whiteflies as well. These are sap-feeding insects, just like our stink bugs, aphids, and others, and they can be really hard to get rid of if you get a strong population of them. Now, insecticides such as neem or horticultural oils can be effective at defending against them. We also recommend using an insect growth regulator. Younger whiteflies will consume the growth regulator and it'll prevent them from becoming adults. They'll just die because their body is unable to complete its life cycle. If you use a growth regulator, this means that there will be no next generation to produce more whiteflies. Just remember, when you want to use these products, follow the label directions. Make sure they are labeled for what you're wanting to get rid of. Our last species is actually not an insect. This is a mite. The two-spotted spider mite is the one I'm highlighting here. These are plant feeders that can cause stippling and other issues on the surface of the leaf, which will reduce photosynthesis of the plants they attack. The easiest way to monitor for spider mites is to check for signs of their webbing. They will form webbing all throughout plant leaves that they travel on. It won't look quite like a spider web. It'll just look like tiny little strings in between the leaf points and throughout the leaf stems. Sometimes you are able to see spider mites with the naked eye. I know I'm able to see two-spotted spider mite if I look closely, but I know that may not necessarily be the case for everyone, so keep an eye out for that webbing. You do have some control options through the soaps and oils that I mentioned before. There's also a biological control agent that you can use called velvet mite that will attack spider mites, and that'll help protect your plants. Just keep in mind when you choose to use a biological control agent, it may not necessarily go where you want it to, so don't consider it a silver bullet, just one of the many tools you have available to you. All right, that's all I had for you with this program. I've left my contact information here in case you would like to speak to me further about this subject. I'm always willing to talk about herbs and insects and the ways that you can protect them. I've also left the web addresses for the Purdue Ed Store, which has many publications on how to handle these issues, as well as the Purdue Plant and Pest Diagnostic Lab. This is our laboratory where you can send in samples of diseases and other issues that you just can't solve, and our lab will take the time to go through it and identify them. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for taking a look at our recording today. Please remember to like and subscribe, and keep watching our channel for more recordings and programs that we post up throughout the year. Thank you.